Yvette, basically just looking at the commentary on it, saying that food and non-food items have experienced disinflation. Where are we seeing the biggest slowdown in prices?
Well, the largest component of the CPI basket is food, so that's over 53% of the overall basket is confined by food. So the slowing down of food prices in line with the harvest seasons, and particularly the maize harvest, which are coming on stream now, have contributed to lower food inflation, which, as I mentioned, has a very large bearing on the headline inflation. But what's also contributed to lower inflation in July has been the sharp appreciation of the Zambian kwacha against the US dollar. It's obviously moved quite sharply since the beginning of this month, moving to levels of, on average this month, below 4,900 from levels above 5,200 in the previous month. So this has contributed to lowering items such as fuel prices, which obviously have resulted from imports of fuel. So that has contributed to alleviating some of the price pressures in the non-food categories of the CPI basket.
So basically broad-based slowdown there. Let's quickly touch on that kwacha right now, because looking at some of the commentary, some of the adjectives have been that used to be described, these new laws have been draconian, and it seemed to have sparked much controversy. At this point, is it likely that these laws are going to stay in place?
I think they will. I think the government feels fairly comfortable about these laws. They don't feel that they have a necessarily bad effect on the economy, and I think it's been obviously an adjustment process for the corporate sector in Zambia, and particularly those who previously were transacting in US dollars for domestic transactions, so particularly companies that were under contract by the mines and were being paid in US dollars. But I think the government is quite adamant to ensure de-dollarization of the economy, and is through these measures trying to effectively create greater transparency in the transactions between the mining corporations as well as other sectors of the economy. So I don't think they are necessarily feeling uncomfortable with these measures thus far, and have reiterated that they are here to stay.
On the food side of the equation, there are rising fears right now about food price inflation, given the fact that we have seen a rally across the board with regards to soft commodities. When it comes to Zambia specifically, does the fact that it is a food producer, one of the biggest food producers in sub-Saharan Africa, insulate it at all from rising food prices?
What Zambia has been very successful in over the past years is generating enough food production to meet its own needs. So over the past 3 years, it's sustained food production that is nearly sufficient to meet its own domestic requirements, and therefore has not been reliant on food imports to supplement its own production. So this speaks in its favor in that it won't be affected necessarily as sharply by rising commodity prices in the region, and more specifically globally. Maize prices particularly obviously are those that have been in focus over the recent past. In South Africa, we've seen quite a sharp rise in maize prices over the past 4 weeks. But because Zambia is not reliant on imports to supplement its domestic production, the impact is likely to be relatively benign.
Yvette, which sub-Saharan African countries or which African countries should we be most worried about when it comes to these spiking food prices?
We've obviously got a problem whereby some countries have faced very adverse weather conditions, particularly, for example, in the Sahel, where there's been very dry conditions and their domestic production has been affected by this. Therefore, they will face food insecurity and therefore be reliant on food imports. If we look more specifically at the Southern African region, the two countries that have the largest efficiency in terms of local production are Mozambique and Angola. So they supply or rely the most on imports to supplement their own local production. So they are likely to see some impact from the requirement to supplement their own maize production. And these local prices in South Africa will almost have a direct feed through to Mozambique, our neighbour, which generally would look to us to supply additional grain.
Yeah, and of course that a worry when we see the spiking grain prices here in South Africa. Very quickly on the Zambian front, we've also had some trade data that came through, that surplus falling back to 114 billion kwacha. And now there's new talk of a new kind of legal instrument that will change the way that mining companies report. Is this going to have any implications for the size of the trade numbers that we see with regards to, say, exports and import figures?
What we've seen is that the Minister of Minerals and Mines has come out and said that they would look to require mining companies to repatriate their foreign exchange earnings from the exports of minerals to Zambia. What the common belief is and has been for quite some time in Zambia is that mining companies are underreporting the volumes and even the quality of their mining exports. So this is in line with their initiatives to try and improve the transparency of the mining companies, and ultimately there's a belief that there will be a greater or an increase in the value of exports that will emerge from this greater transparency. In terms of the numbers that we saw in June and vis-a-vis May, these numbers are reported in Zambian kwacha, so obviously the stronger kwacha had some feed through there, but obviously the main driver behind this decline has been the lower global prices of copper on the commodity markets. So that will continue to form the main driver, obviously, of commodity exports for Zambia. But these legal instruments could potentially see greater transparency, and if the authorities are right, perhaps see a greater or an increase in the value of exports due to some issues being addressed with regards to underreporting of volumes and underreporting of the quality of copper that's being exported.
Yeah, I'm sure that, of course, is seen as a positive sign when it comes to the local market. You wonder how mining companies are going to react to this, but of course it is good. Transparency is always good. Yvette Babb, thank you so much for joining us. She's, of course, an Africa Research Strategist at Standard Bank.